Dodge City, a dusty frontier town etched into American memory, where justice was a fast draw and silence often said more than a sermon. From 1955 to 1975, it wasn't just a setting, it was a world. One built on smoke, grit, and the solemn gaze of Marshal Matt Dillon. Maybe you watched Gunsmoke with your father. Maybe the black and white glow flickered across a wooden TV set in a living room that no longer exists. Or maybe you found it late one night, long after it ended, and felt something you couldn't quite name, but couldn't shake. Gunsmoke wasn't merely a TV show. It was a ritual, a story of moral codes tested in the shadows, of love unspoken, and pain hidden beneath stoic faces. It became the longest-running dramatic series in American television history, not by chance, but because it gave audiences something few shows dared to offer: characters who felt real, flawed, and unforgettable. But nothing gold lasts forever. As time passed, the faces we once welcomed into our living rooms began to fade, first from screen, then from life. Some died loved, some died forgotten, some died surrounded by honor, others surrounded by questions no one dared answer. The camera stopped rolling, but their stories didn't. We grew up watching them. Now it's our turn to remember them. Hit subscribe and keep their stories alive. 1. James Arness, the marshal who never dropped his guard. He was the law in a lawless land. Not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. James Arness didn't just play Marshal Matt Dillon. He wore him like a second skin. Stoic, towering, a man who said more in silence than most could with a monologue. But before he wore a badge, he wore a uniform. In 1944, a young infantryman named James King Arness was shot through the leg by a German machine gun on the beachhead of Anzio. The wounds nearly took his life. They certainly changed it. And for the rest of his life, every step, every scene, he carried that limp like a ghost that wouldn't leave. Hollywood didn't find him. John Wayne did. The Duke passed on Gunsmoke and pointed at Arness. That's your lawman. And for 2 decades, America agreed. 635 episodes. A character carved into stone. And yet, the man behind the myth never tried to be famous. He simply showed up, did the work, and disappeared when the lights went off. But silence doesn't mean absence. There were fractures beneath the frame. A marriage that unraveled. A daughter he couldn't save. Jenny, lost to the darkness in 1975. A pain so deep, he never spoke of it publicly. But it showed. In his eyes. In the weight he carried behind that badge. When Gunsmoke ended, Arness didn't chase another spotlight. No tell-all books. No desperate cameos. He moved to Brentwood, lived quietly, and stayed exactly who he was. A man who never needed to prove anything. And on June 3, 2011, at age 88, James Arness died of natural causes. No drama. No spectacle. Just a quiet exit, fitting for the quiet giant. And somewhere in the wind, Dodge City went still. 2. Amanda Blake, the flame behind the bar. She didn't wear a badge, but make no mistake, she held just as much power in Dodge City. With her fiery red hair, commanding voice, and eyes that saw through every lie, Miss Kitty Russell wasn't a side character. She was the beating heart of Gunsmoke. And for 19 seasons, Amanda Blake poured herself into that role until it blurred with who she really was. Born Beverly Louise Neal in Buffalo, New York, Amanda wasn't raised in the West, but she carried its strength. MGM thought she could be the next Greer Garson. Instead, she became something rarer, a woman in Westerns who wasn't just waiting to be rescued. Off-screen, Amanda was no less bold. She once brought her pet lion, Chemo, to set. She bred cheetahs, co-founded Arizona's oldest no-kill shelter. And yet, beneath the fearlessness, there was a shadow. Gunsmoke never gave Kitty the ending she deserved. And Hollywood never gave Amanda the credit she earned. She left the show in 1974, quietly. No big goodbye. No farewell episode. Just a closed door that never reopened. In 1989, Amanda Blake died at 60. The official cause was hepatitis. But whispers followed. Quiet reports linked her death to AIDS. It never appeared on the death certificate. No one confirmed it. And in that silence, the weight of stigma lingered. She was the woman behind the bar, and behind the myth. The one who never drew first, but never backed down. And when she finally disappeared from Dodge City, it felt like the soul of the town left with her. 3. Milburn Stone, the doctor who knew too much. He wasn't kind. He wasn't gentle. And he rarely smiled. But when Doc Adams spoke, people listened, not because they liked him, but because they trusted him. For 20 seasons, Milburn Stone played the town physician of Dodge City like a man carrying too many secrets and not enough patience. He scowled. He drank. And beneath it all, he healed. Not always willingly, but always completely. Born Hugh Milburn Stone in Kansas, he was vaudeville before he was television. Toured with tent shows. Did time in serials and B-westerns. He worked in the shadows of Hollywood for years, always just outside the spotlight, until Gunsmoke gave him a name and a purpose. Stone wasn't glamorous. He wasn't charming, but he was real, and the audience felt it. He brought weariness to Doc that came from somewhere deeper, like the weight of a man who'd seen too many people die. Behind the scenes, he was fiercely committed to the role. So much so that when a heart attack sidelined him in 1971, he fought to return, and did, missing only 7 episodes across 2 decades. The show never replaced him. They couldn't. He won an Emmy, but he didn't chase stardom. He had no need to. He knew what Gunsmoke was, and what it wasn't. In 1980, 5 years after the show ended, Milburn Stone died of a heart attack at age 75. No scandal. No downfall. Just the final breath of a man who had already given everything to the role that defined him. He was never the hero, never the center of attention, but if there was pain in Dodge City, he was the one who had to look it in the eye. And sometimes, that's the hardest job of all. 4. Ken Curtis, the fool who outlived the joke. He walked funny, talked funny, looked like a man stitched together from prairie dust and whiskey breath. Festus Hagen was the comic relief of Gunsmoke, until he wasn't. Played by Ken Curtis, Festus began as a punchline. But over time, he became something more, the conscience of Dodge City. Uneducated, uncouth, and utterly unbreakable. A man who would fight for you even if he couldn't spell your name. But Ken Curtis was nothing like Festus. Born Curtis Wayne Gates in Colorado, he was the son of a sheriff and once studied medicine. He sang in the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, played Carnegie Hall, had a voice that could hush a saloon. Before he ever picked up a 6-shooter, he held a microphone, and audiences listened. He married the daughter of director John Ford, acted alongside John Wayne, and produced low-budget monster films in the 50s. He was smart, talented, restless, but when Gunsmoke called, he didn't hesitate. He stepped into Festus's filthy boots, and never really took them off. For over a decade, he limped through Dodge with that broken voice and half-crazed stare. But beneath the dirt and growl was nuance, loyalty, loss, and a kind of wisdom that couldn't be learned in school. Off-screen, Curtis was disciplined and professional. He patterned Festus on a real drifter from his hometown, a man who lived in the hills and always wound up in jail. But Curtis brought him to life with heart, not mockery. When he died in 1991 of a heart attack in his sleep, there were no headlines. Just another quiet goodbye from a man who'd spent a career playing loud. Festus was never meant to be the soul of the show, but somehow, in his own crooked way, he became exactly that. 5. Dennis Weaver, the loyal sidekick who limped away. Before Festus, there was Chester, the drawl, the limp, the loyal shadow who followed Matt Dillon like a conscience in boots. Chester Good wasn't a lawman, but he never needed a badge to do the right thing. Played by Dennis Weaver, Chester was more than comic relief. He was the quiet echo to Dillon's thunder. The man who flinched, but never ran. Who stayed, long after it was easy. Weaver brought depth to the role no one expected. The limp? His idea. A physical symbol of vulnerability in a world of guns and grit. But there was steel behind the stammer. Chester wasn't weak. He was human. Off-screen, Weaver was a different man entirely. Born in Missouri. Navy pilot in World War II. Olympic-level decathlete. He studied acting at the Actors Studio alongside Shelley Winters. He chose Chester, and when he'd had enough, he chose to leave. After 9 seasons, Dennis Weaver walked away from Gunsmoke. He didn't want to be a sidekick forever, and he wasn't. He became a star in his own right, headlining McCloud, battling an invisible truck in Spielberg's Duel, and becoming president of the Screen Actors Guild. He even built an eco-home made of recycled tires and cans, long before it was trendy. But the limp followed him. So did the shadow of Dodge. In 2006, Dennis Weaver died of cancer at 81. A quiet exit, far from the dusty streets that made him famous. Some men shoot straight. Some talk tough. But Chester Good and Dennis Weaver did something rarer. They stood by. And sometimes, that's harder. Six. Burt Reynolds, the star who ran from Dodge. Before the mustache. Before the posters. Before he became the face of American swagger. He was a blacksmith in Dodge. As Quint Asper, Burt Reynolds didn't speak much. He didn't need to. There was danger in his stillness. Sadness, too. He stayed just long enough for people to remember him, then left before anyone could hold him back. Gunsmoke was a gift, he once said. But I knew I didn't belong in the background. And he didn't. By the 1970s, Reynolds was everywhere. Deliverance. The Longest Yard. Smokey and the Bandit. He laughed, drove fast, wore the grin of a man who had everything, and knew it. But fame, like the highway, doesn't go in one direction. The 80s turned cruel. Bad scripts. Expensive divorces. Money gone as fast as it came. He lived loud, and the fall was louder. Still, he never gave up the work, even when the cameras turned cold. Then came Boogie Nights. In 1997, Reynolds returned to form in a role that mirrored his own arc. A man in the shadows of former glory, clinging to relevance, pride, and a legacy slipping through his fingers. It earned him an Oscar nomination, and reminded the world, beneath the charm was a real actor, still fighting. But time doesn't pause for redemption. Burt Reynolds died in 2018 of a heart attack. He was 82, alone, working, rewriting his name until the very end. He left Dodge early, too big for that world. But there's something poetic about how it all began there, with a hammer in hand and silence behind the eyes. 7. Glenn Strange, the quiet one behind the bar. He didn't say much, didn't draw, didn't chase women. But Sam the bartender was always there, steady hands, soft eyes, and a presence like a pillar in the storm. Played by Glenn Strange, Sam Noonan wasn't meant to be memorable. And yet, he became part of the furniture of Gunsmoke and of Dodge City itself. The man behind the bar, the one who saw it all and said nothing. But before the saloon, Glenn Strange had already lived a dozen lives. Cowboy, rodeo man, fiddler, deputy sheriff. He was raised in Crosscut, Texas, taught himself to play guitar by ear, and toured the country in a singing group before drifting into B-westerns. Hollywood loved his size, 6'4", with a stare like thunder. He played outlaws, henchmen, beasts. Most famously, he became the Frankenstein monster in House of Frankenstein, the version still used in Universal's posters to this day. Yes, the quiet man pouring drinks on Gunsmoke was once the face of cinematic horror. But Sam suited him better. There was something calming in how he moved, a kind of sorrow behind the small talk. Strange joined Gunsmoke in the early 60s and stayed for over a decade. Then, in 1973, as quietly as he lived, he slipped away, taken by lung cancer. There were no headlines, no tributes, just a bar with no one behind it. He was the last one you noticed in a scene, and the first you missed when he was gone. Some men fire guns, others hold the room together. Glenn Strange did it with a look, a nod, and a glass quietly slid across the counter. 8. James Nusser, the drunk who understood more than he let on. Louis Feeders was the town drunk, always slumped in a corner, always muttering. But if you looked closer, really looked, you'd see something else. A man who had lost too much and remembered everything. Played by James Nusser, Louis was never central to the story, but he was there, in the background, watching, listening, hurting. Nusser brought a strange kind of poetry to the role. He didn't overact, didn't ask for sympathy, just let Louis exist, a man broken by years and whiskey, but still standing. Off-screen, Nusser lived just as quietly. Little is known about his personal life. He made appearances in Perry Mason, Disney, and a few scattered credits. But Gunsmoke was home. He passed away in 1979 in Los Angeles. The cause was never publicly disclosed. Just like Louis, he slipped out the door, mostly unnoticed. But for those who paid attention, he was the reminder that even the smallest roles can carry the deepest truths. 9. Ted Jordan, the man who was always there. He didn't ride tall or shoot fast, but if you watched Gunsmoke long enough, you saw him, behind the wagon, in the crowd, carrying the town on his back without saying a word. Ted Jordan played Nathan Burke, a recurring face in Dodge City for over 100 episodes. He was the background heartbeat, the man who made Dodge feel real. And that was his gift. He made small moments matter. Born in 1924, Jordan worked steadily through the golden age of westerns. Rawhide, Mission, Impossible, Dragnet. But Gunsmoke was where he stayed, not in the spotlight, but just behind it. He passed away in 2005, at age 80, from heart disease. No scandal, no noise. Just another quiet departure from the town that never really said goodbye. He may not be remembered by name, but if you've ever loved Gunsmoke, you've seen his face and felt his presence. Dodge City is quiet now. The dust has settled. The saloon is closed. The star-shaped badge hangs on a nail no one touches. We remember the gunslingers, the lawmen, the women who waited behind the bar. But what we often forget are the actors who gave them breath. Some left this world in silence, some in heartbreak, some in the shadow of scandal, and others long before the applause stopped echoing. They weren't perfect. They weren't invincible. But they were there, week after week, year after year, holding up the stories that held up our childhoods, our families, our quiet nights in front of a flickering screen. Maybe you remember watching Gunsmoke with someone you've already lost. Maybe that's why it still hits hard, even now. So let's not let them vanish twice. Subscribe, not for the fame they had, but for the silence they left behind, for the flicker of light still hiding in the dust, for the stories worth telling, even after the credits roll. Because Dodge City may be gone, but as long as we remember them, it never really closed.